Iran just drew a line in the sand, and I need you to understand something right now. This is not a bluff. This is not posturing. This is not the kind of threat that gets walked back in 72 hours when the news cycle moves on. In the last 24 hours, Iranian officials issued a direct and unmistakable threat to Donald Trump through the Tasnim news agency, and the implications of what they said should be keeping every national security professional in Washington awake tonight. If American Marine Expeditionary Units move on Karg Island or attempt to force entry into the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. Not might. Will. The same choke point that the Houthis already proved, definitively proved, they could paralyze for months on end. The same corridor that carries a staggering percentage of global shipping, the lifeline between Asia and Europe, the artery that keeps the global economy breathing. And while this is unfolding, while an adversary with genuine strategic leverage is staring down the barrel at the most powerful military apparatus ever assembled on planet Earth, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, is posting on social media about deploying ICE agents to airports. 2 theaters, 1 military, 1 theatrical. And that gap, that yawning chasm between what this crisis demands and what the person supposedly leading the response is actually focused on, tells you everything you need to know about where this situation is heading and how fast it is getting there. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what Iran is constructing while the American president remains catastrophically distracted, why the strategic architecture of the Middle East, the order that has existed since 1945, is being demolished and rebuilt in real time, and why the geopolitical reality you are living in this evening looks fundamentally, irreversibly different from the world you woke up in 3 weeks ago. And I need you to stay with me here because the details matter and nobody else is assembling them in this sequence. Here is a way to think about what is happening. Imagine you are in a high-stakes business negotiation. Your competitor, who you have underestimated for years, just locked down exclusive partnership agreements with your 3 biggest clients. They set up a toll booth on the only road that leads to your primary facility. They started charging your remaining allies for access to infrastructure you used to control. And instead of mounting a response, instead of getting in the room and fighting for your position, you are standing in the parking lot screaming about who gets to check IDs at the front entrance. How many days pass before your partners stop returning your calls? How many weeks before they stop pretending the old relationship still exists? Hold that image in your mind because that is exactly, precisely, what is playing out on the global stage right now. I want you to drop your answer in the comments. Is this strategic incompetence of a magnitude we have never witnessed, or is something deeper, something more structural, driving what we are seeing? Let us rewind the clock and examine the theory that just collapsed in real time. When Trump launched military operations against Iranian infrastructure, the assumption circulating through every corridor of power in Washington was straightforward, almost elegant in its simplicity. Overwhelming force, quick capitulation. The regime buckles because that is what regimes do when America hits them hard enough. That was the theory. Strike with sufficient speed and sufficient violence, and Iran would come crawling to the negotiating table with nothing left to bargain with, desperate for any off-ramp Washington chose to offer. It was the same logic applied to Iraq in 2003, the same logic applied to Libya in 2011. And just like those catastrophic miscalculations, this theory dissolved on first contact with reality. It did not bend, it shattered. Iran did not buckle. Iran did precisely what sophisticated strategic actors do when they find themselves outgunned on one front and cannot win a conventional engagement. They opened every other front simultaneously: the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, the Houthi network that Western intelligence spent years dismissing as a ragtag militia, bilateral diplomatic channels with every major economy on Earth that needs oil to keep flowing. While Trump remained fixated on the kinetic campaign, on the explosions, on the footage that plays well on cable news, Iran was waging an entirely parallel war of strategic positioning. And in a resource war, in a conflict over who controls the choke points that the global economy depends on, positioning is everything. The missiles are almost beside the point. The calculation in Tehran was remarkably, almost unnervingly, clear-eyed. You do not need to defeat the American military because nobody defeats the American military in a direct engagement. What you need to do is make the cost of continued operations so astronomical, so disruptive to global energy flows, so catastrophically damaging to American alliance structures that the operation collapses under its own weight. You do not have to win the fight. You have to make the wound too expensive to keep inflicting. And the receipts, the evidence that this strategy is working, are already piling up faster than anyone in Washington wants to acknowledge. Receipt number 1. The Hormuz toll booth. Iran is not merely defending the Strait of Hormuz in a conventional military sense. Iran is monetizing it. According to reporting from multiple international outlets, Iranian leadership is actively planning to enshrine an entirely new status quo for strait transit, requiring every single passing vessel to pay fees directly to Tehran for the privilege of using waters that international law has always designated as open passage. Expediency Council member Mohammad Mokhber, a senior advisor to the Supreme Leader on Economic Affairs, told Iranian state media in terms that could not be more explicit that they are establishing a business enterprise. Consider the implications of that statement for just one moment. The most critical oil choke point on planet Earth, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the entire global daily oil supply flows every single day, is being transformed into Iran's personal revenue stream. This is happening in the middle of a military campaign that was explicitly designed to break Iranian power. Washington was not consulted about this arrangement. Washington was not in the room when the terms were being drafted. Washington learned about it from news reports. And that silence, the complete absence of any coherent American response to an adversary declaring functional ownership of a global artery, is deafening. Because what you do not say when a rival claims control of critical infrastructure tells the world just as much as what you do say. Receipt number 2. The client list is expanding by the day. Iran's foreign ministry is not huddled in a bunker somewhere waiting for the next American bomb to fall. Iran's foreign ministry is executing a sophisticated, full-spectrum diplomatic offensive that would make any State Department professional deeply envious. The Iranian Navy successfully guided an Indian liquefied petroleum gas tanker through the Strait of Hormuz following direct diplomatic engagement with New Delhi. The vessel transited on a route pre-approved by Tehran under Iranian naval escort, with the full knowledge and cooperation of the Indian government. Prime Minister Modi publicly acknowledged his direct conversation with Iran's president, explicitly condemned attacks on critical infrastructure in the region, and reiterated in terms that left nothing to interpretation the absolute importance of keeping shipping lanes open for international commerce. That statement was not about regional peace. That statement was about access, about India securing its energy future regardless of what Washington thinks about it. Then came Japan. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that Tehran stands ready to facilitate the passage of Japanese vessels through the strait, with active negotiations already underway. This diplomatic opening materialized immediately following the widely criticized spectacle of Prime Minister Ishiba's White House visit, where Japanese media outlets reported widespread public fury over the humiliating treatment their head of government received on American soil. Japan watched its prime minister belittled. Japan watched decades of carefully cultivated trade relationships thrown into chaos and uncertainty. And then Japan, one of America's most reliable allies for 80 years, quietly opened a back channel to Tehran. India, then Japan. As one regional analyst framed the trajectory with precision, if India's tanker passage program proves successful, other countries will follow within weeks, not months. Iran is systematically building a client list. It is positioning itself as the indispensable gatekeeper of global energy transit, not through military conquest, not through territorial expansion, but through diplomacy and leverage and the simple reality of geography. Every country that signs up for Iranian escort services, every nation that formalizes these transit arrangements, is a country quietly, methodically decoupling from the American security umbrella, one by one, without fanfare, without asking Washington's permission, without even the courtesy of a phone call. Receipt number 3, the distraction machine operating at full capacity. While Iran systematically constructs a new regional order in the Persian Gulf, while American strategic interests erode by the hour, Donald Trump posted a statement threatening to deploy ICE agents to commercial airports if, in his precise words, radical left Democrats do not sign an agreement to let airports be free and safe again. He singled out immigrants from Somalia. He attacked Congresswoman Ilhan Omar by name. He attacked the governor of Minnesota. He attacked the state attorney general. And he closed the post with his signature phrase, "This is not wartime communication. This is not what a commander-in-chief does during an active military engagement with strategic consequences. This is a culture war grenade lobbed into the discourse to change the subject, to redirect attention from failures that are becoming impossible to conceal." And the MAGA caucus in Congress received the talking points. Republican senators announced an emergency weekend session with great urgency. The emergency that required interrupting the congressional schedule was not the unauthorized military campaign spiraling beyond anyone's control, not the financial markets hemorrhaging value, not the Strait of Hormuz being converted into an Iranian toll collection operation. The emergency that demanded immediate Senate attention was biological males participating in women's athletics. That is what the United States Senate designated as urgent business requiring weekend intervention. While American military personnel remain deployed in an active and expanding conflict zone, while Iran rewrites the fundamental rules of global maritime commerce in real time. Meanwhile, Hawaii is experiencing its worst flooding event in 2 decades. FEMA's operational capacity has been systematically gutted. There has been no presidential statement acknowledging the disaster, no emergency mobilization, no federal response framework activated. The president is posting from Mar-a-Lago about airport security protocols, while American citizens are quite literally underwater, waiting for help that is not coming. That is not governance in any recognizable form. That is abandonment. If this analysis is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, if this sequence of events is clarifying something that felt confusing before, you are already operating with more information than most people watching this situation unfold. Hit subscribe right now. This crisis is moving faster than any single news outlet can track, and you need to be positioned to understand what happens next when the next piece of this puzzle drops. The strategic genius of asymmetric warfare. Most national leaders, when facing direct military threat from a superpower with overwhelming conventional advantages, respond with one of 2 predictable moves: capitulate and seek terms, or escalate recklessly and get destroyed. Iran did neither. Iran responded with systems. It activated the Houthi threat architecture across the Red Sea without firing a single additional shot. It simply reminded the world that the network exists, that the capability is real, and that it can be switched to full operational status at any moment Tehran chooses. It opened bilateral shipping corridors with India and Japan. It established a fee framework for straight transit. It transformed a military disadvantage being outgunned by American firepower into an economic choke point that the entire global economy now has to negotiate with. Not through missiles, not through aircraft carriers, through geography, through leverage, through institutional patience. Here is the contrast that should be keeping every defense strategist and national security professional awake at night. While Iran methodically accumulates leverage, Trump removed oil sanctions on Iran. He removed oil sanctions on Russia. As energy analyst Dan Steinbach explained to NBC News in terms that could not be more damning, the United States is now actively funding a war against itself. The oil revenues currently flowing into Iranian government accounts are financing the very defensive systems, the very diplomatic outreach programs, the very alliance-building initiatives that are actively undermining the American military campaign. You cannot beat geography, Steinbach warned, and you absolutely cannot beat geography when you are subsidizing your opponent's ability to exploit their geographic advantages against you. Remember when Trump posted on August 5th, 2024, and I quote directly, "Stock markets are crashing, job numbers are terrible, we are heading toward World War III, and we have 2 of the most incompetent leaders in history. It was always projection. It was always a preview of coming attractions." The markets have been in sustained freefall this past week. The CEO of Qatar Energy told Reuters journalists that the past 20-plus days of conflict have set the entire region back 20 years in terms of development and stability. He warned that he personally contacted the American Energy Secretary daily, sounding every alarm available, and that nobody in a position of authority listened or responded with appropriate action. Arab nations that believed they had entered into straightforward transactional relationships with the Trump administration, pay money, receive protection, discovered the actual terms of the arrangement. They got played, because that is what this pattern always produces. It takes the payment, makes the promise, and when consequences arrive, it changes the subject to something inflammatory enough to dominate the next news cycle. Why this crisis belongs to you personally. If you drive a car, if you heat a home, if you purchase any product that moves through global supply chains at any point in its journey from manufacturer to your possession, this crisis is your crisis. The Strait of Hormuz handles approximately 20% of total global daily oil supply. If Iran successfully consolidates control over transit fees through that choke point, energy costs do not return to previous levels when the shooting stops. The elevated prices become the permanent new baseline. They become structural. If Japan and India formalize long-term escort and transit arrangements with Iranian naval forces, the American security guarantee that has underpinned Gulf stability since the 1940s, the very foundation of the petrodollar system that makes the US dollar the world's reserve currency, starts appearing optional. Once major economies restructure their energy logistics around a new security partner, they do not restructure back simply because political tensions eventually subside. The shipping routes change, the contracts change, the leverage changes, and none of it reverses automatically. This is not a temporary disruption that will resolve when cooler heads prevail. This is a restructuring event. The architecture is being rebuilt while we watch. 3 roads forward from this moment. Where does this trajectory lead? 3 realistic pathways exist, and I need you to understand something crucial. None of them restore the pre-war status quo. That world is already gone. Scenario 1. Managed de-escalation through intermediaries. International mediators successfully broker a cooling-off period. Some face-saving arrangement gets announced with appropriate ceremony. The kinetic operations cease. But the structural changes that have already occurred remain locked in place. The India Transit Corridor continues operating. The Japan Corridor formalizes. The toll framework becomes accepted reality. None of those developments snap back to previous arrangements. They have already replaced the old order. Scenario 2. Cascading domino realignment. Additional nations follow the precedent established by India and Japan. South Korea formalizes similar arrangements. Southeast Asian economies dependent on Gulf oil negotiate their own bilateral terms with Tehran. European energy importers, desperate for supply certainty, begin quiet discussions about alternative security frameworks. A new network crystallizes and becomes self-reinforcing through accumulated momentum. The United States remains the most powerful military force on Earth by every quantitative measure, but is no longer the unquestioned automatic guarantor of global energy security. OPEC internal dynamics shift permanently as member states recalculate their options. The dollar's unique role in energy markets faces genuine structural competition for the first time in 50 years. Scenario 3. Escalation spiral. Trump, facing collapsing approval ratings and mounting political pressure from all directions, decides to double down on military options, strikes target Iranian naval installations directly. An attempt to seize control of the strait through overwhelming force is ordered. Iran responds by activating Houthi forces across the entire Red Sea operational theater. Global shipping insurance rates explode overnight to levels that make commercial transit economically prohibitive. Oil prices spike past $200 per barrel within days. Allied governments around the world face immediate pressure to declare their positions, to choose sides publicly and irreversibly. NATO alliance structures fracture further under the strain of incompatible national interests. This is the scenario that nobody in official positions wants to name out loud, but that every defense ministry in every major capital is quietly planning for right now. The contingency folders are open on desks tonight. What has already permanently changed? Regardless of which specific scenario eventually materializes, the fundamental relationship between the United States and the global energy order has already transformed. Even if Trump reverses course completely tomorrow, even if every current policy gets abandoned by noon, the lesson has been absorbed by every mid-sized power on Earth. The strategic implications have been internalized at the institutional level. You never, under any circumstances, place all your strategic dependencies in a single basket, especially when that basket is being managed by someone who posts inflammatory content about domestic airport security, while an actual war rages half a world away, demanding focused attention. The perception shift that has occurred is permanent. Trust, once it gets restructured at the institutional level, does not simply return because circumstances change. Credibility is not a switch that flips back. Iran did not initiate this conflict, but it is proving remarkably, almost disturbingly effective at exploiting every single mistake the opposing side makes. Not through superior firepower, not through a larger navy or more advanced weapon systems, through geography that cannot be relocated, through diplomatic sophistication, through accumulated leverage, and through the institutional patience to allow an impulsive adversary to defeat himself one social media post at a time. So I will leave you with these questions to consider. Did Iran outmaneuver the United States, or did the United States outmaneuver itself? Is what Iranian leadership is executing smart self-preservation, rational actors responding to existential threat with available tools, or a dangerous gamble that could spiral beyond anyone's ability to control? And when the definitive history of this moment eventually gets written, when scholars assess what happened here, will the verdict conclude that the most powerful nation in human history was undone by a foreign adversary's strategic brilliance, or by a president who could not stop posting long enough to read a single intelligence briefing? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Subscribe immediately, because the next chapter of this crisis, the Houthi activation order, the emergency OPEC session, the next catastrophic market shock, is coming faster than anyone wants to admit. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified professionals before making any decisions.